So now we are in book 1, chapter 4. It's called The Preparation. And this is just picking right up where we left off in chapter 3. So I'm going to skip around a little bit. So just make sure that you're following along. So when the mail got successfully to Dover, again, Dover is right at the, in between, or on the edge of the English Channel, and then France is on the other side. In the course of the forenoon, the head drawer at the Royal George Hotel, so that's where he's stopped, opened the coach door as his custom was. He did it with some flourish of ceremony, for a mail journey from London in winter was an achievement to congratulate an adventurous traveller upon. By that time, there was only one adventurous traveller left, and that's Laurie, for the other two had been set down on their respective roadside destinations. The mildewy inside of the coach, with its damp and dirty straw, its disagreeable smell, and its obscurity, was rather like a large dog kennel. Mr. Laurie, the passenger, shaking himself out of it in change of straw, a tangle of shaggy wrapper, flapping hat, and muddy legs, was rather like a large sort of dog. There will be a packet to Calais tomorrow, drawer. A packet is a little a boat, so a ship that's going to take him from England over to France. Calais is the town in France, that first port town that you hit. Yes, sir, if the weather holds and the wind sets tolerable fair. The tide will serve pretty nicely at about 2 in the afternoon, sir. Bed, sir? I shall not go to bed until tonight, but I want a bedroom and a barber. And then breakfast, sir? Yes, sir, that's the way. So the worker at the hotel takes him inside and kind of, gets him cleaned up and things like that. So I'm jumping down on 16 to the very last paragraph. So it says, very orderly and methodical he looked. So this is talking about Laurie's physical description, with a hand on each knee and a loud watch ticking a sonorous sermon under his flat coat waistcoat, as though it pitted its gravity and longevity against the levity and evanescence of the brisk fire. He had a good leg and was a little vain of it, for his brown stockings fitted sleek and close and were of a fine texture. His shoes and buckles, too, though plain, were trim. He wore an odd little sleek, crisp flaxen wig, setting very close to his head, which wig, it is presumed, was made of hair, but which looked far more as though it was spun from filaments of silk or glass. His linen, though not of the fineness in accordance with his stockings, was as white as the tops of the waves that broke upon the neighboring beach, or the specks of sail that glinted in the sunlight far away at sea. A face habitually suppressed and quieted was still lighted up under the quaint wig by a pair of moist, bright eyes that must have cost their owner in years gone by some pains to drill to the composed and reserved expression of Tellson's Bank. He had healthy color in his cheeks, and his face, though lined, bore few traces of anxiety. But perhaps the confidential bachelor clerks in Tellson's Bank were principally occupied with the cares of other people, and perhaps second-hand cares, like second-hand clothes, came easily off and on. Completing his resemblance to a man who was sitting for his portrait, Mr. Laurie dropped off to sleep. The arrival of his breakfast roused him, and he said to the drawer as he moved his chair to it, I wish accommodation prepared for a young lady who may come here at any time today. She may ask for Mr. Jarvis Laurie, or she may only ask for a gentleman from Tellson's Bank. Please to let me know. Yes, sir. Tellson's Bank in London, sir? Yes. Yes, sir. We have oftentimes the honor to entertain your gentlemen in their travelling backward and forward betwixt London and Paris, sir. A vast deal of travelling, sir, in Tellson's and Company House. So, just like there's a Citizens Bank in one town, it's not like it's the only Citizens Bank, right? It's just one branch. So as far as Tellson's goes, there's a Tellson's branch in London, but then there's a Tellson's branch in Paris too, and that's a lot of these guys, these bankers, travel back and forth between the two branches to, make sure that business is going well. Yes, we are quite a French house as well as an English one. Yes, sir. Not much in the habit of traveling yourself, I think, sir. Not of late. It is 15 years since we, and then he corrects himself and says, since I came last from France. So it's been a long time since he's been back. Indeed, sir, that was before my time here, sir. Before our people's time here, sir. The George was in other hands at that time, sir. I believe so. But I would hold a pretty wager, sir, that a house like Tellson and Company was flourishing a matter of 50, not to speak of 15 years ago. You might treble that and say 150, yet not be so far from the truth. Indeed, sir, Rounding his mouth and both his eyes as he stepped backward from the table, the waiter shifted his napkin from his right arm to his left, dropped into a comfortable attitude, and stood surveying the guest while he ate and drank, as from an observatory or watchtower, according to his immemorial use of waiters in all ages. When Mr. Lorry had finished his breakfast, he went out for a stroll on the beach. The little narrow, crooked town of Dover hid itself away from the beach and ran its head into the chalk cliffs like a marine ostrich. The beach was a desert of heaps of sea and stone tumbling wildly about, and the sea did what it liked, and what it liked was destruction. It thundered at the town and thundered at the cliffs, and brought the coast down madly. The air among the houses was of so strong a piscatory flavor that one might have supposed sick fish went to be dipped in, as sick people went down to be dipped in the sea. A little fishing was done in the port, and quantity of strolling about by night and looking seaward, particularly at those times when the tide made and was near flood. Small tradesmen, who did no business whatsoever, sometimes unaccountably realized large fortunes, and it was remarkable that nobody in the neighborhood could endure a lamplighter. As the day declined into the afternoon, and the air, which had been at intervals clear enough to allow the French coast to be seen, became again charged with mist and vapor, Mr. Lorry's thoughts seemed to cloud too. So this is that connection between characters and us as the reader and the weather. When it was dark and he sat before the coffee-room fire, awaiting his dinner as he had awaited his breakfast, his mind was busily digging in the live red coals. A bottle of good claret or wine after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm. Otherwise, then it has a tendency to throw him out of work. Mr. Lorry had been idle a long time, and had just poured out his last glassful of wine, with as complete an appearance of satisfaction as ever to be found in an elderly gentleman of a fresh complexion, who had got to the end of a bottle, when a rattling of wheels came up the narrow street and rumbling into the inn-yard. He set down his glass untouched. "This is Mademoiselle," said he. In a very few minutes the waiter came to announce that Miss Manette had arrived from London, and he would be happy to see the gentleman from Tellson's. So soon? Miss Manette had taken some refreshment on the road, and required none then, and was extremely anxious to see the gentleman from Tellson's immediately, if it suited his pleasure and convenience. The gentleman from Tellson's had nothing left for it but to empty his glass with an air of stolid desperation, settle his odd little flaxen wig at the ears, and follow the waiter to Miss Manette's apartment. So, Lucy Manette is the woman that he's been waiting for. So that message that he got from Jerry Cruncher that said, "Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle," this is that Mademoiselle. I have to fix my lights. So I'm just jumping down to the next paragraph. It says, "The obscurity was so difficult to penetrate that Mr. Lorry, picking his way over the well-worn Turkey carpet, supposed Miss Manette to be, for the moment, in some adjacent room, until, having got past the two tall candles, he saw, standing to receive him by the table between them and the fire, a young lady of not more than 17, in a riding cloak, and still holding her straw hat by its ribbon in her hand. As her eyes rested on a short, slight, pretty figure, a quantity of golden hair," so notice that description and make sure that you write it down, "a pair of blue eyes that met his own with an inquiring look, and a forehead with a singular capacity, remembering how young and smooth it was, of lifting and knitting itself into an expression that was not quite one of perplexity or wonder or alarm, or merely of a bright, fixed attention, though it included all the four expressions. As his eyes rested on these things, a sudden vivid likeness passed before him of a child whom he had held in his arms on the passage across that very channel." So, before, when he made the mistake, when he was talking to the hotel worker who was serving him, he said, "It's been 15 years since we," and then he says, "since I last have been to Paris." The last time he was in Paris, he was bringing Lucy as a child to England, and so that was the last that either of them have been to France. So he knows her. That's the other thing to keep in mind. So I'm just turning the page to 20. He says to her, "Pray take a seat, sir." Or she says to him, "Pray take a seat, sir," in a very clear and pleasant young voice, a little foreign in its accent, but a very little indeed. "I kiss your hand, miss," said Mr. Lorry, with the manners of an earlier date, as he made his formal bow again and took his seat. "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday, informing me that some intelligence or discovery, the word is not material, miss, either word will do, respecting the small property of my poor father, whom I never saw, so long dead. So her father is dead. Mr. Lorry moved in his chair and cast a troubled look toward the hospital procession of Negro Cupids, as if they had any help for anybody in their absurd baskets. Render it necessary that I should go to Paris. They are to communicate with the gentleman of the bank, so good as to be dispatched to Paris for that purpose. So Lucy is there because she thinks that there is some property from her father that was left to her, and so she's like trying to find out about that. As I was prepared to hear, sir, she curtsied to him, then jumping down. I replied to the bank, sir, that as it was considered necessary by those who know and who are so kind as to advise me that I should go to France, and that I am an orphan and I have no friend who could go with me, I should esteem it highly if I might be permitted to place myself during the journey under that worthy gentleman's protection. So he's that gentleman, Lorry is. I was happy, said Mr. Lorry, to be entrusted with the charge. I shall be more happy to execute it. Sir, I thank you indeed. I thank you very gratefully. It was told to me by the bank that the gentleman would explain to me the details of the business, and that I must prepare myself to find them of a surprising nature. I have done my best to prepare myself, and naturally I have a strong and eager interest to know what they are. Naturally, said Mr. Lorry. Yes, After a pause, he added, and again settled the crisp flaxen wig at the ears. It is very difficult to begin. So based on how he's messing with his wig, he says it's difficult to begin. It's obvious that he's nervous about what he has to tell Lucy. He did not begin, but in his indecision met her glance. The young forehead lifted itself into that singular expression, but it was pretty and characteristic beside being singular, and she raised her hand as if with an involuntary action she caught at or stayed some passing shadow. Are you quite a stranger to me, sir? Am I not? Said Mr. Lorry, opening his hands and extending them outward with an argumentative smile. Between the eyebrows and just over the little feminine nose, the line of which was as delicate and fine as was possible to be, the expression deepened itself as she took her seat thoughtfully in the chair. Jumping to the next paragraph. In your adopted country, I presume, I cannot do better than address you as a young English lady, Miss Minette. So if England is her adopted country, it means that she is originally from France. If you please, sir. Miss Minette, I am a man of business. I have business charge to acquit myself of. In your reception of it, don't heed me any more than I was a speaking machine truly. So he's going to keep saying over and over, like, this is just business. Don't get emotional. This is just business. Obviously, what he's about to say, though, is emotional. So he says, I'm going to tell this story, so I'm just jumping down a little bit. He seemed willful to mistake the words she had repeated while he added in a hurry, yes, customers in the banking business, we usually call our connection to our customers. He was a French gentleman, a scientific gentleman, a man of great acquirements, a doctor, not of Beauvais. Why, yes, of Beauvais. Like Monsieur Minette, your father, the gentleman was of Beauvais, so that's just a town in France. Like Monsieur Minette, your father, the gentleman was of repute in Paris. Something just popped up on my screen. I had the honor of knowing him there. Our relations were business relations, but confidential. I was at that time in our French house, and it had been 20 years. At that time, I may ask, at what time, sir? I speak, miss, of 20 years ago. He married an English lady, and I was one of the trustees. His affairs, like the affairs of many other French gentlemen and French families, was entirely in Tellson's hands. So, Lucy's dad married her mother, and they hired a banker, just to handle their finances, and Lorry was that banker back in Paris. In a similar way, I am or have been a trustee of one kind or another for scores of our customers. I'm jumping down. But this is my father's story, sir, and I begin to think the curiously roughened forehead was very intent upon him, that I was left an orphan through my mother surviving my father only 2 years. It was you who brought me to England. I am almost sure of it. So she recognizes him now, and now we find out she doesn't have a mother or father. Mr. Lorry took the hesitating little hand that confidingly advanced to take his, and he put it with some ceremony to his lips. He then conducted the young lady straight away to her chair, and then jumping down. Miss Minette, it was I, and you will see how truly I spoke of myself just now in saying I have no feelings, and that all the relations I hold with my fellow creatures are mere business relations, when you reflect that I have never seen you since. Jumping down, after this odd description of his daily routine of employment, Mr. Lorry flattened his flaxen wig upon his head with both hands. So far, miss, as you have remarked, this is the story of your regretted father. Now comes the difference. If your father had not died when he did, don't be frightened how you start. She did indeed start, and she caught his wrist with both hands, so she's crying. Pray, said Mr. Lorry in a soothing tone, bringing his left hand from the back of the chair to lay it on the supplicatory fingers that clasped him in so violent a tremble. Pray, control your agitation, a matter of business, as I was saying. So then just jump down to over to 24. She keeps crying. And the first real paragraph says, without directly answering to his appeal, she sat so still when he had gently raised her, and the hands that had not ceased to clasp his wrist were so much more steady than they had been, that she communicated some reassurance to Mr. Jarvis Lorry. That's right, that's right. Courage, business. You have business before you, useful business. Miss Manette, your mother took this course with you, and when she died, I believe broken-hearted, having never slackened her unavailing search for your father, she left you, at 2 years old, to grow to be blooming, beautiful, and happy, without the dark cloud upon you of living in uncertainty, whether your father soon wore his heart out in prison, or wasted there through many lingering years. So, we just found out that Dr. Manette, Lucy's dad, was in prison. So this whole time that she thought that he was dead, initially he was in prison, and that's why the mom died, a broken heart, trying to find him. As he said the words, he looked down with admiring pity on the flowing golden hair, as if he pictured to himself that it might have already been tinged with gray. You know that your parents had no great possession, and what they had was secured to your mother and you. There has been no new discovery of money or any other property. But, so really she's not there because there's some house or some money that was hidden away. There's some other reason. He felt his wrist held closer, and he stopped. The expression in the forehead, which had so particularly attracted his notice, and which was now immovable, had deepened into one of pain and horror. But he has been found. He is alive. Greatly changed. It is too probable, almost a wreck, it is possible, though we still hope the best. Still alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and we are going there, I to identify him if I can, you to restore him to love, life, duty, rest, and comfort. So notice that word restore is very similar to what other word that we know. Obviously recalled. So that's Lucy's job. So the two of them are going to the old servant's house in Paris, which is where Manette is staying, and Lucy's job is to bring him back mentally, and Laurie's job is to recognize him. A shiver ran through her frame, and from it through his. She said in a low, distinct, awe-stricken voice, as if she were saying it in a dream, I am going to see his ghost. It will be his ghost, not him. Mr. Lorry quietly chafed the hands that held his arm. There, there, there. See now, see now. The best and worst are known to you now. You are well on your way to the poor wronged gentleman, and with a fair sea voyage and a fair land journey, you will soon be at his dear side. She repeated in the same tone, sunk to a whisper, I have been free, I have been happy, yet his ghost has never haunted me. So the word ghost here is supposed to remind us of the dream that Mr. Lorry was having. So the reason he's thinking about like digging somebody out is he's going to retrieve Manette, who's been in jail for 18 years. Only one thing more, said Mr. Lorry, laying stress upon it in a wholesome means of enforcing her attention. He has been found under another name, his own, long forgotten or long concealed. It would be worse than useless now to inquire which, worse than useless to seek to know whether he has been for years overlooked or always designedly held prisoner. It would be worse than useless now to make any inquiries because it would be dangerous. Better not to mention the subject anywhere or in any way, to remove him for a while, of all events, out of France. Even I, safe as an Englishman, and even Tellson's, important as they are to French credit, avoid all naming of the matter. I carry about me not a scrap of writing openly referring to it. So this is a secret. They don't want people to know that Manette has been retrieved and is being brought to England. My credentials, entries, and memoranda are all comprehended in one line, recalled to life. So that's the secret message, which may mean anything. But what is the matter? She doesn't notice a word. Perfectly still and silent, and not even fallen back in her chair, she sat under his hand, utterly insensible, with her eyes open and fixed upon him, and with that last expression looking as if it were carved or branded into her forehead. So close was her hold upon his arm that he feared to detach himself lest he should hurt her. So Lucy faints, which you'll notice is common for her. So then suddenly, a wild-looking woman, whom even in his agitation Mr. Lorry observed to be all of red color, and to have red hair, and to be dressed in some extraordinary tight-fitting fashion, and to have on her head a most wonderful bonnet like a grenadier wooden measure, and a good measure too, or a Stilton cheese, came running into the room in advance of the inn servants, and soon settled the question of his detachment from the poor young lady by laying a brawny hand upon his chest and sending him flying back. So a woman comes, she has crazy hair, crazy red frizzy hair. Her name is Miss Pross. She's not named here, but you'll find out later. And so she pushes Laurie so hard, she lays a hand on his chest and pushes him that he flies back against the wall, and she's rushing to Lucy, and so she is Lucy's caretaker. I really think this must be a man, said Mr. Lorry, breathless reflection, simultaneously with his coming against the wall. Why, look at you all, bawled this figure, addressing the inn-servants. Why don't you go and fetch things instead of standing there staring at me? I'm not so much to look at, am I? Why don't you go and fetch things? I'll let you know. If you don't bring smelling salts, cold water, and vinegar quick, I will. There was an immediate dispersal of these restoratives, and she laid the patient on the sofa, tended her with great skill and gentleness, calling her my precious. So she continues to tend to Lucy until she wakes up, and that's basically the end of the chapter. And now they know what they have to do, and so they are headed to France. And that's it for chapter 4.